Now that we're recording, yeah, we have to end this discussion. So yeah, we haven't been in this for over a month because we flipped over to some Advent things, and so which I got good feedback from. I think that format works pretty well. So I'll try to start working some of those kind of formats up. But in the meantime, till I get all that done, we're going to go back to Game of Thrones and continue on where we were. Where we left off with Jeremiah. Jeremiah is in Ezekiel. Sorry, in Ezekiel. So Jeremiah is a prophet. He's in and around Jerusalem at this point, preaching to the people there, and it's not very well liked because he tells them the truth and they don't want to hear the truth. And Ezekiel is a prophet to those that are living in Assyria. Or I'm sorry, not Assyria, Babylon. So because Babylon has started their takeover of Judea. But Assyria is not gone. There is still some power struggle there. And until Babylon destroys Assyria, which Assyria does a pretty good job of destroying itself, but Babylon comes in later on. But there's still some things going on in Assyria. Well, Assyria, based out of Nineveh, you've got what we're going to read today is called Judith. Okay. And she mentioned it's kind of revolves around Nebuchadnezzar, who's Assyrian. Okay. But by this point, Nebuchadnezzar was dead, chronologically. So it could have been someone, Nebuchadnezzar, if we're using it as an title, it could have been used like the president, the same as the president, something like that would be the title. So we don't have much written about that time frame. We kind of skip over a lot of things in the Bible. Well, there are some legends, and I call them legends because we don't really have too much of historical basis for them, although they're timely, meaning we get some kind of chronological basis for some of it, but there's no attributable evidence. There's no other writings that prove it, especially if we had something from Assyria or from Babylon who took really, really good records, it would have a whole lot more credence. But what we're going to start reading today for the next few weeks is this apocryphal book called Judith. And Judith is one of those that's living in Babylon, or in Assyria, or Nineveh, Assyria. And there is kind of the background of this. Again, Nineveh and Assyria are breaking down. And so they're trying to use all available things to maintain their empire. And it's not working. All the countries they solicit for help, even those they conquered before, are revolting against them. And they're not helping. So Assyria, Nebuchadnezzar here gets upset and he threatens them. That would be like a cockroach threatening your cable TV or something. That's kind of where they're at. So we're going to read Judith, and we're going to read a few chapters of that today. Judith. And I do have, it's like I said, it's one of the apocryphal books. So it's the Catholic Church, the Coptic Ethiopian, and the Eastern Orthodox. Let's just say the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church regard them as historical, but they don't advocate for them to be Lutheran of the area. They don't do anything to improve them. They're just historical. the Coptic Ethiopian church believes that this is actually Holy Scripture. So, so keep that in mind. Protestants, it's just another myth. It's not Scripture, it's legend. And that's kind of what I believe. It's just a legend. It's a story that, in legends, and when we look at legends, even though they're probably fictional, they're based in some kind of reality. There had to be some reason somebody wrote it down. I mean, most of our fictional novels are based around some kind of plot that exists in real life. So kind of we read it from that kind of perspective. But it is interesting because it sounds a whole lot like Ruth. Not Ruth, Esther. We haven't gotten to Esther yet. Because Esther involves Greeks. And Greeks don't come about for a couple hundred years. Well, about 100 years in this one. And Judah is specifically Assyria. But very, very similar storylines. Okay? So
Judah, you normally think of that as being a woman's name, right? But it's back then it could have been.
Well, it would have been, it's the female version of Judah. So it isn't. Here we go. That worked. All right. First time. Okay. Remember I talked about having to end our discussion? No, that's okay. Okay, so Judah chapter 1. It was the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled over the Assyrians in the great city of Nineveh. In those days, Arphaxad ruled over the Medes in Ecbatana. Now, the Medes are going to start coming to power just after the Babylonians start destroying. Okay? Because that's where Darius and Cyrus come into play. Okay? He built walls around Ecbatana with hewn stones 3 cubits thick and 6 cubits long. What's a cubit? Yeah, basically from the elbow. The standard cubit was from the elbow to the wrist. The long cubit was the elbow to the fingertip. So, yeah, when builders set out to measure these things in order to use their resources to its fullest extent, they would look for the shortest. They look for the person with the smallest arm. That way, they didn't use all their resources.
There's a lot of people with short arms. It's all uniform.
Right. So it's about 18 inches. Just consider 18 inches. Foot and a half. So 1 cubit is a foot and a half. So 3 cubits is going to be 4.5 feet. 6 cubits is going to be 8 feet. Wow. Is that right? Or 9 feet. Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. He made the wall 70 cubits high. That's 105 feet. And 50 cubits wide. Wow. What's that? That's 75 feet wide. At its gates, he raised towers 100 cubits high. That's 150 feet. And 60 cubits wide at foundations. He made its gates 70 cubits high and 40 cubits wide to allow his armies to march out in force and his infantry to form their ranks. Then King Nebuchadnezzar made war against King Arphaxad in the great plain that is on the borders of Ragrau. There rallied to him all the people of the hill country and all those who lived along the Euphrates, the Tigris, and the Hydaspes, and on the plain, Arioch, king of the Elameans. Thus many nations joined the forces of the Cheliodites. Then Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, sent messengers to all who lived in Persia and to all who lived in the west, those who lived in Cilicia and Damascus, Lebanon and Anti-Lebanon, and all who lived along the seacoast, and those among the nations of Carmel and Gilead and Upper Galilee and the great plain of Esdraelon, and all who were in Samaria and its towns, and beyond the Jordan as far as Jerusalem and Bethany and Telius and Kadesh, and the river of Egypt, and Topanes and Ramesses, and the whole land of Goshen, even beyond Tanis and Memphis, and all who lived in Egypt as far as the borders of Ethiopia. The whole world. Pretty much, the whole known world. But all who lived in the whole region showed contempt for the summons of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, and refused to join him in the war, for they were not afraid of him, but regarded him as only one man. So they sent back his messengers empty-handed and disgraced. Then Nebuchadnezzar became very angry with this whole region and swore by his throne and kingdom that he would take revenge on the whole territory of Cilicia and Damascus and Syria, that he would kill with his sword and also all the inhabitants of the land of Moab and the people of Ammon and all Judea and everyone in Egypt as far as the coasts of the two seas. In the 7th year, he led his forces against King Arphaxad and defeated him in battle, overthrowing the whole army of Arphaxad and all his cavalry and all his chariots. Thus he took possession of his towns and came to Ecbatana, captured its towers, plundered its markets, and turned its glory into disgrace. He captured Arphaxad in the mountains of Ragau and struck him down with his spears, thus destroying him once and for all. You would think that something this big would be recorded. No. No. Then he returned to Nineveh, and he and all his combined forces, who are his combined forces? Just his, because nobody joined him. A vast body of troops, and there he and his forces rested and feasted for 120 days. So 4 months. In the 18th year, on the 22nd day of the first month, there was a talk in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, about carrying out his revenge on the whole region, just as he had said. He summoned all his attendants and all his nobles and set before them his secret plan and recounted fully with his own lips all the wickedness of the region. They decided that all who had not obeyed his command should be destroyed. When he had completed his plan, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called Holofernes, the chief general of his army, second only to himself, and said to him, "Thus says the great king, the Lord of the whole earth, leave my presence and take with you men confident in their strength, 120,000 foot soldiers and 12,000 cavalry. March out against all the land of the west because they disobeyed my orders. Tell them to prepare earth and water, for I am coming against them in my anger and will cover the whole face of the earth with the feet of my troops, to whom I will hand them over to be plundered. Their wounded shall fill their ravines and gullies, and the swelling rivers shall be filled with their dead. I will lead them away captive to the ends of the whole earth. You shall go and seize all their territory for me in advance. They must yield themselves to you, and you shall hold them for me until the day of their punishment. But to those who resist, show no mercy, but hand them over to slaughter and plunder throughout the whole." But it's making for a great movie.
It'll take a lot of people.
Yeah. For as I live, the power of my kingdom, what I have spoken, I will accomplish with my own hand. And you take care not to transgress any of your Lord's commands. Carry them out exactly as I have ordered you. Do it without delay. Interesting that Nebuchadnezzar would tell Holofernes, okay, do everything I said, don't do anything I didn't. Why would he have to tell his chief general, second only to him, not to disobey? He didn't trust him. So Holofernes left the presence of his lord and summoned all the commanders, generals, and officers of the Assyrian army. He mustered the picked troops by divisions as his lord had ordered him to do, 120,000 of them, together with 12,000 archers on horseback. And he organized them as a great army was marshaled for a campaign. He took along a vast number of camels and donkeys and mules for transport, and innumerable sheep and oxen and goats for food. Also ample rations for everyone and a huge amount of gold and silver from the royal. Why do you think you need gold?
Really?
So Nebuchadnezzar doesn't necessarily fully trust his chief general, and the chief general doesn't necessarily trust the loyalty of his own troops. Yeah, you see where this is going. You could also take into account that maybe on their way, those nations that are cordial, have a cordial relationship with them, that maybe they afraid. But yeah, I'm of the former. But yeah, he's got to pay the troops. Then he set out with his whole army to go ahead of King Nebuchadnezzar and cover the whole face of the earth to the west with their chariots and cavalry and picked foot soldiers. Along with them went a mixed crowd, like a swarm of locusts, like the dust of the earth, a multitude that could not be counted. So, a mixed crowd. That could mean a lot of different things. We don't have any reference as to what it could be. That could have been the soldiers' families. It could have been people that were just interested in what was getting ready to go on. It could have been those that didn't want to stay back with what was left. So, and it couldn't be counted. They marched for 3 days from Nineveh to the plain of Bethlehem and camped opposite Bethlehem near the mountain that is to the north of Upper Cilicia. From there, Holofernes took his whole army, the infantry, cavalry, and chariots, and went up into the hill country. He ravaged Put and Lud, and plundered all the Rassites and the Ishmaelites on the border of the desert, south of the country of the Chileans, not Chile. But then he followed the Euphrates and passed through Mesopotamia and destroyed all the fortified towns along the Wadi Abron as far as the sea. He also seized the territory of Cilicia and killed everyone who resisted him. Then he came to the southern borders of Jacob, facing Arabia. He surrounded all the Midianites and burned their tents and plundered their sheepfolds. Then he went down into the plain of Damascus during the wheat harvest and burned all their fields and destroyed their flocks and herds and sacked their towns and ravaged their lands and put all their young men to the sword. Now, what's going on in Damascus? You would normally live in Damascus. The northern Israel, yeah, the northern kingdom, but even part of it. So these are people that Nebuchadnezzar, when Assyria invaded the northern kingdom, he took these peoples from there and he separated them and distributed them to other Assyrian cities. But then other nations that he conquered, he did the same thing with them. He distributed them. Well, some of them ended up in Damascus. So he's killing the own people that he had conquered already. But they refused to help him. I wonder why. So fear and dread of him fell upon all the people who lived along the seacoast of Sidon and Tyre, and those who lived in Sur and Hosina, and all who lived in Jambia. Those who lived in Azotus and Ascalon feared him greatly. Okay, we've just ended chapter 2. Notice anything?
No word about God.
No word about God, no word about Judith. Okay. Yeah, we're not going to hear about Judith this week, probably. Okay, just giving you a heads up.
Anything about God?
No. They therefore sent messengers to him to seek for peace in these words. We, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, the great king, lie prostrate before you. Do with us whatever you will. See, our buildings and all our land and all our wheat fields and our flocks and herds and all our inhabitants lie before you. Do with them as you please. Our towns and their inhabitants are also your slaves. Come and deal with them as you see fit. The men came to Holofernes and told him all this. Then he went down to the seacoast with his army and stationed garrisons in the fortified towns and took picked men from them as auxiliaries. The people in all the countryside welcomed him with garlands and dances and tambourines, yet he demolished all their shrines and cut down their sacred groves, for he had been commissioned to destroy all the gods of the land, so that all nations would worship Nebuchadnezzar alone, and that all their dialects and tribes should call upon him as a god. Y'all remember that story about Nebuchadnezzar? Okay. So you can see where legend kind of has some basis in some kind of fact. Then he came toward Esdraelon near Dothan, not Dothan, Alabama. Facing the great ridge of Judea. You camp between Geba and Scythopolis. No, Scythopolis. And remained for a whole month in order to collect all the supplies for his army. Okay, so he's collecting supplies, so that may be where some of that gold and silver came. When the Israelites living in Judea heard of everything that Holofernes, the general of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Assyria, had done to the nations and how he had plundered and destroyed all the temples, they were therefore greatly terrified at his approach. They were alarmed both for Jerusalem and for the temple of the Lord their God. By this point in Judah's history, they weren't focused on worshiping God in the temple. They were worshiping other things. Okay? So this is either anachronistic, meaning it's out of time, or it's just part of the story that they put in here to embellish the story. Okay? But they had only recently returned from exile. Now, you see where that makes it anachronistic? Nobody's returned from exile. They still got 70 years before that. And Nebuchadnezzar wasn't in power when they returned from exile. So this was probably written after the exile. And all the people of Judea had just now gathered together in their sacred vessels, and the altar and the temple had been consecrated after their profanation. So they sent word to every district of Samaria, and to Kona, Beth Horon, Belmain, and Jericho, and Choba and Asarah, and the valley of Salem. They immediately seized all the high hilltops and fortified the villages on them, and stored up food in preparation for war, since their fields had recently been harvested. The high priest Joachim, who was in Jerusalem at the time, that was not Joachim, was actually the king that had already been conquered, wrote to the people of Bethulia and Tomethine, which faces Esdraelon, opposite the plain of Jordan, ordering them to seize the mountain passes, since by them Judea could be invaded, and it would be easy to stop any who tried it. The approach was narrow, wide enough for only two at a time. This is very similar to a story back in Judges. So we're getting kind of ideas of that. Now, we do have historical data that seems to indicate that this is what Judah did right before the third invasion by Babylon. Okay. So again, this is why I believe it's legend based in some kind of fact, but they got their facts wrong. So the Israelites did as they had been ordered by the high priest Joachim and the council of the whole people of Israel in session at Jerusalem. And every man of Israel cried out to God with great fervor, and they humbled themselves with much fasting. No, they didn't. They and their wives and their children and their cattle and every resident alien and hired laborer and purchased slave, they all put sackcloth around their waists. And all the Israelite men, women, and children living in Jerusalem prostrated themselves before the temple and put ashes on their heads and spread out their sackcloth before the Lord. They even draped the altar with sackcloth and cried out. And now that would have never happened. No matter what happens, you don't cover God up. Okay? Crying out in unison, praying fervently to the God of Israel not to allow their infants to be carried off and their wives to be taken as slain. And the towns they had inherited to be destroyed, and the sanctuary to be profaned and desecrated to the malicious joy of the nation. Interesting, they would worry about desecration of the sanctuary, because that's what would happen about 250 years from this point, when Antiochus IV Epiphanes would desecrate. The Lord heard their prayers and had regarded them for the distress, and the people fasted many days throughout Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord. The high priest Joachim and all the priests who stood before the Lord and ministered to the Lord with sackcloth around their loins, offered the daily burnt offerings, the votive offerings, free will offerings of the people with ashes on their turbans. They cried out to the Lord with all their might and looked with favor on the whole house of Israel. This was written in Greek, by the way. I should probably say that. So that's another indicator that this would have been written after. Because turbans was not a Hebrew. There was no word for turban. It was reported to Holofernes, the general of the Assyrian army, that the people of Israel had prepared for war and had closed the mountain passes and fortified all the high hilltops and set up barricades in the plains. In great anger, he called together all the princes of Moab and the commanders of Ammon and all the governors of the coastland, and said to them, "Tell me, you Canaanites, what people is this that lives in the hill country? What towns do they inhabit? How large is their army? And in what does their power and strength consist? Who rules over them as king and leads their army? Why have they alone, of all who live in the west, refused to come out and meet you?" Then Achior, the leader of all the Ammonites, said to him, "May my Lord please help." So far, Nebuchadnezzar has made good on his revenge, and he's conquered these people enough that they're now obeying. Then Achior, the leader of the Ammonites, said to him, "May my Lord please listen to a report from the mouth of your servant, and I will tell you the truth about these people that lives in the mountain district near you. No falsehood shall come from your servant. These people are descended from the Chaldeans." Who are the Chaldeans?
Gentiles.
They're Babylonians. And Babylon is just coming into power. So this is another anachronism. It's out of time. They mixed up. It's like saying George Washington went and saved all the nuns along the San Antonio Riverwalk during the War of 1812. Did all those things happen? Yes. Did they happen at the same time? Absolutely not. Okay. At one time, they lived in Mesopotamia because they did not wish to follow the gods of their ancestors who were in Chaldea. That's a reference back to Hebrew. Since they had abandoned the ways of their ancestors and worshiped the God of heaven, God they had come to know, their ancestors drove them out from the presence of their God. So they fled to Mesopotamia and lived there for a long time. Then their God commanded them to leave the place where they were living and go to land of Canaan. There they settled and grew very prosperous in gold and silver and very much livestock. When a famine spread over the land of Canaan, they went down to Egypt and lived there as long as they had food. That was Isaac and Jacob. That would be, Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. There became so great a multitude that their number could not be counted. So the king of Egypt became hostile to them. He exploited them and forced them to make bricks, reducing them to slaves. They cried out to their God and inflicted the whole land of Egypt with incurable plagues. So the Egyptians drove them out of their sight. Then God dried up the Red Sea before them. Is that what God did? He dried up the Red Sea? Parted it. Okay. And he led them by the way of Sinai and Kadesh Barnea, and drove out all the people of the desert, except for the Arameans. They didn't drive out the Arameans, and that cost them later on here in David. So. And took up residence in the land of the Amorites, and by their might destroyed all the inhabitants of Heshbon. Crossing over the Jordan, they took possession of all the hill country. They drove out before them Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites. By the way, Jebusite, Jebus was the original name of Jerusalem. Okay? The Shechemites and all the Gergesites that lived there a long time. As long as they did not sin against their God, they prospered. For the God who hates iniquity is with them. But when they departed from the way it prescribed for them, they were utterly defeated in many battles and were led away captive to a foreign land. The temple of their God was razed to the ground, and towns were occupied by their enemies. This is another reference because by this point the temple's still standing when this has supposedly happened. So whoever wrote this story wrote it after the temple had been sacked by the But now they have returned to their God and have come back from the places where they scattered and have occupied Jerusalem where their sanctuary is and settled in the hill country because it was uninhabited.
So the Jebusites were the people who lived in the Jerusalem area.
Yeah, like a city state. Yep.
He was Joshua.
Correct. So now my master and Lord, Moses and Joshua, because it would have been named God. So now my master and Lord, if there is any oversight in this people and they sin against their God and we find out their offense, then we can go up and defeat them. So let's look at their sins and throw it back in their faces. But if they're not a guilty nation, then let my Lord pass them by, for their Lord and God will defend them, and we shall become the laughingstock of the whole world. No nation would have said that. Our God is better than your God. That's what they would have said. May your God, be victorious today, Nebuchadnezzar. That's what this servant would have said. He wouldn't have said, their God may be stronger. When Achior had finished saying these things, all the people standing around the tent began to complain. Holofernes, his officers, and all the inhabitants of the seacoast and Moab insisted that he should be cut to pieces. They said, "We are not afraid of the Israelites. They are a people with no strength or power for making war. Therefore, let us go ahead, Lord Holofernes, and their vast army will swallow them up." Chapter 6, this is the last one. When the disturbance made by the people outside the council had died down, Holofernes, commander of the Assyrian army, said to Achior in the presence of all the foreign contingents, "You, Achior, and your mercenaries of Ephraim, prophesy among us as you have done today, and tell us not to make war against the people of Israel because their God will defend them." What God is there except Nebuchadnezzar? Now you're seeing, and this is what I'm talking about. He will send his forces and destroy them from the face of the earth. Their God will not save them. We, the king's servants, will destroy them as one person. They cannot resist the might of our cavalry. We will overwhelm them. Their mountains will be drunk with their blood, and their fields will be full of their dead. Oh, I'm loving this. This sounds like a TV show on AMC. Not even their footprints will survive our attack. They will utterly perish. So says King Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of the whole earth. For he has spoken. None of his words shall be. As for you, Achior, you Ammonite mercenary, That may have been where some of the gold and silver came from, too. They paid mercenaries. You have said these words in a moment of perversity. Is that right? Yes. You shall not see my face again from this day until I take revenge on this people that came out of Egypt. Then at my return, the sword of my army and the spear of my servant shall pierce your sides, and you shall fall among their wounded. Now my slaves are going to take you back into the hill country and put you in one of the towns beside the passes. You will not die until you perish along with them. Huh, that's hopeful. If you really hope in your heart that they will not be taken, then do not look downcast. I have spoken, and none of my words shall fail to come true. So he basically said, hey, if they beat us, then you're safe. If we win, though, bye-bye. Then Holofernes ordered his slaves to wait on him in his tent to see Achior and take him away to the food and hand him over to the death. So the slaves took him and led him out of the camp into the plain, and from the plain they went up into the hill country and came to the springs below Bethulia. When the men of the town saw them, they seized their weapons and ran out of the town at the top of the hill, and all the slingers kept them from coming up by throwing stones at them. So having taken shelter below the hill, they bound Achior and left him lying at the foot of the hill and returned to their land. When the Israelites came down from their town and found him, they untied him and brought him into Bethulia and placed him before the magistrates of the town, who in those days were Uzziah, son of Micah, of the tribe of Simeon, and Chabris, son of Bethoniel, and Carmus, son of Melchiel. They called together all the elders of the town and all their young men and women. They set Achior in the midst of all their people, and Uzziah questioned him about what had happened. He answered and told them what had taken place at the council of Holofernes, and all that he had said in the presence of the Assyrian leaders, and all that Holofernes had boasted he would do against the house of Israel. Then the people fell down and worshiped God and cried out, "O Lord God of heaven, see their arrogance and have pity on our people and their humiliation, and look kindly today on the faces of those who are consecrated to you." Then they reassured Achior and praised him highly. Uzziah took him from the assembly to his own house and gave a banquet to the elders. And all that night they called on the God of Israel. So the Ammonites are now in collusion with the Israelites to fight against them. That's it. So next week we hear about the campaign against Methuselah, the distress of the Israelites, the character of Judith. We finally hear about Judith. Judith meets with the elders, the prayer of Judith. That's one of those special prayers too. It's really an awesome prayer. She prepares to go to Holofernes. Spoiler alert, where this is a lot like Esther, she utilizes her beauty to gain access to the chief general that she's captured and brought before the meeting. So, this is like Luke Skywalker I'm going to go meet the emperor and destroy him, but before he gets there, he gets captured and taken to him anyway. Right. So, any questions, concerns, criticisms?
Okay.
No?
That's a deep thought.
Yeah. So, yeah, today was kind of, I know, boring. All we heard about was battle campaigns and things. Next week, the story was really interesting. It starts in more like a soap opera. Okay. So yeah, anyway, it does get more interesting. I'm right. Okay. We'll go ahead and end our thing, and God bless.